the Everything But Politics podcast.
All right, we are live. Hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas as we are here recording our very last episode of 2024, and a very special episode it is. Joining us is a man whose been a soundtrack to most of our lives, Joe Buck. Welcome.
What's up, guys? How are we today?
We're doing well.
Doing amazing, yeah.
It's a pleasure to be with you. How was your Christmas?
Tiring. I'm 55. I've got daughters who are 28 and 25, my oldest of which is about to get married. And then I've got 6.5-year-old twin boys. So right now, I'm just happy to be on so I can hide from them in the basement because I'm just flat out worn out. I'm 55 years old and I get older by the minute. But I got through it. We got through it. We had a great time. And now we're ready for the new year.
You spent it in St. Louis?
Yeah, we were all in St. Louis, which is great. Everybody's like, where are you going for Christmas break? I'm like, it's the one time that we're not going to travel because that's all I typically do is travel. But the boys being off school, it's like, what in the hell are we going to do all day, every day? So that's kind of where we are in my life right now. But it's all good.
I would agree. Well, I met you a couple weeks ago down in Bloomington, which was a fun game, that Michigan game. And then a week ago today, tough end to it. Fantastic season, right? Like, who would have expected Indiana in the college football playoff? So when you reflect on these last 3-4 months, I mean, from August to now in December, what's your assessment?
It was magical. I think it's easy to get a little wrapped up and disappointed with the way it ended at Notre Dame, and not remember how amazing it was, coming out of nowhere. And I can't act like I've been a diehard fan since I left campus in 1991. That would be a lie. But I damn sure was keyed into everything going on this year with this team. I think they were a fun team. They were obviously well coached. It's kind of, to me, it's the good side of this whole new portal NIL stuff where you can actually turn a program around, as Coach Signetti did, in seemingly months instead of years or decades, because you can bring in your players who know your system and they can filter into the existing team and make the whole product better. So it was a great year, and it
absolutely
kind of ticks me off that everybody, wants to take shots at Indiana. I think they're an easy target. They didn't play well that last game that they played, and that happens in sports. Not everybody brings their best game every time they take the field. And, I think you have to tip your cap to Notre Dame and just be happy, generally speaking, with what Indiana did this year. And the guys they're getting now through the portal seem like the team will be even better next year. So we'll wait and see, but it's an exciting time to be a Hoosier fan.
Absolutely. And speaking of college football, there's a lot of exciting games coming up in the next couple days. What are your predictions on who wins this thing?
I mean, I tend to go to the big horses in this thing just because
you got to. Yep.
I mean, you have to. If you're, I don't even know who I would pick as a team to kind of surprise everybody. But to me, I mean, Ohio State, Georgia, it's the same old stuff. That to me, it was the exciting thing about the playoff. It got the fringe fans, and I would actually consider myself, in some ways, a fringe fan, like excited about this format that brought some new blood into the postseason and brought, hope to more programs and more areas of the country with, some crazy outlandish dream of winning a national championship. Maybe that wasn't realistic. But, I would say one of those two teams, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, I think is obviously a team that, they're number one going into this whole thing. So the usual suspects, but there's always going to be an upset along the way at some point.
Totally. So, Joe, we live in this age of distraction, right? Where everyone is like a dopamine junkie. So with that said, given all the preparation that goes into what you do, what have you found is the most effective way to be productive, like while avoiding all outside distractions when you're preparing for Monday Night Football?
It's a great question. I think I read something called the Daily Stoic every day, which
Yeah, Ryan Holiday.
yeah, Ryan Holiday, who is brilliant, great writer, great ability to put ancient philosophies into today's world. I think the one that came out today is as we talk here on the 27th of December about what do you do in between? What do you do in between the events of your life? What do you do if you've got a meeting coming up at 1 o'clock or a podcast coming up at 1:30 and you're free from 1 to 1:30? How do you fill that time? And I think it's easy to just pick up your phone, go to Instagram, scroll. I'm not a Facebook guy, but I'm sure it's the same there. It's the same on X, whatever.
Yep.
And I think that time can be better spent either meditating, which I try to mix in during the course of the day, or just putting your phone over there so that it's not a distraction to just constantly look down and fill your mind with what you just said, all that kind of dopamine rush of, whether it's FOMO or whatever else is going on in our lives, feeling like, oh my God, look at that. They're in the Caribbean right now. And I'm sitting here in my office in right now, rainy, cold St. Louis. And you feel like, man, they've got it made. And I'm just saying, it's almost kind of depressing. So for me, because of the aforementioned 6.5-year-old twins, and then the distraction of the phone, I have to come down here. My office is in my basement. I have my phone on focus, the focus setting. So it takes kind of a do not disturb approach. And then I just sit here, I light a candle, which sounds corny, but the older you get, the more kind of these silly little things help you. And I do my reading and I try like heck not to fall asleep because for the first time in my life, that day it's quiet. And, I think we can all use a little bit of quiet. And that's kind of what I try to take advantage of. So I hide out a little bit and I fight the guilt of being, oh, my kids are running around upstairs. I should be up there involved. And I am quite a bit, but I think you have to take time for yourself. And I think you have to take a time out for yourself. And whether it's reading something or just sitting and thinking or writing something to kind of exercise those muscles in your brain, I think all that stuff is good. So I think find a space where you can concentrate and actually use that time to not be on your phone.
Well, you mentioned you got to make time for yourself. Did you always think that way, or is that kind of recent?
I think that's more recent. I think it was a lot easier when I was your age, I think, because the phone wasn't around like this. I mean, I think it's a wonderful tool, but it can also just occupy your time. I mean, back when I was a kid, believe it or not, if you got on an elevator, you actually looked at everybody in the eyes and maybe said hello. Now you get on an elevator in a public place and everybody's eyes go whoop, right down to their phone. Nobody is paying any attention to one another. And there's very little human interaction. So I think it's a more of a late life phenomenon for me, knowing that it's important to kind of get back to how I grew up a little bit. I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, I think of my 6.5-year-olds, they are going to be so wired in. On one hand, it's great because I theoretically will always know where they are. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But if you're them, the bad thing is your parents always know where you are. I think every kid deserves the right to kind of wander and find out and get into a little bit of whatever the dorky word mischief might mean to you. But I think all that stuff is seeing, feeling, and living life and learning. And everybody is so connected right now that if you can disconnect, whether it's from a GPS on your phone or you can disconnect from the rest of society by sitting down and reading, I just think it's a good thing for your mind.
I would agree.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of distractions, has there been a moment in your career where you got distracted prior to a game and then the game came and you were like, holy shit, I'm totally unprepared for this?
Yeah, but it wasn't for a bad reason. My first World Series game, I was 27 sitting in the Bronx at Yankee Stadium. It was 1996, and it was the Yankees hosting the Braves. And I was so aware of how big of a platform I was about to stand on because I'd never done anything like that before in my life, anything to that big of an audience. And then when you're sitting there in the Bronx and it's the Yankees against the Braves, who were already a dynasty. You're like, oh my God, this is massive. So I sat down in the booth. You get there 3 hours before the game, and I wanted to kind of slow play all of my prep that I would do game day as I sat there in the booth, and I did my lineups and I did some of the numbers, but I didn't have all of it in. And all of a sudden I kind of looked up. I'm like, oh my God, there's 25 minutes until first pitch. And I'm now I got to scramble and I'm freaking out. And my slow play ended up being like almost like a death knell, because I was like, oh my God, I've got to go, go, go. And now everything I tried to do to relax was out the window. And I was more worried than I would have been had I not done any of that. And then it started to rain and it started to pour. And George Steinbrenner at the time brought in a helicopter to hover over the field to do the rotors so fast it would wick some of the water off the field. They were trying to play game one of the World Series, and it was rained out. And so I got to kind of take a break, go back to the hotel, do it all over again the next day. But now all of my stuff was done. And so I got to go to the ballpark, get ready for the game, and have the luxury of having all of my information all set in my scorebook and everything I needed that I had crammed in the day before. And I got to kind of relax and enjoy the beginning of the World Series at a really young age doing a national broadcast. And I got to ease into it a little bit. It was the greatest gift I got from Mother Nature.
Yeah, what a blessing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a total blessing. And at the time, it was like, oh my God, we just got rained out. I was like, thank God we just got rained out. And all it did was take the travel day away. So if we started on whatever it was, a Tuesday, Wednesday, now instead of a travel day on Thursday, it went Wednesday, Thursday, take an overnight flight, get to Atlanta for Friday. But I didn't mind. Now I was already up and running in the World Series, and kind of the fear of failure and the fear of that big stage was over with, and I could kind of calm down.
You know what, Joe? So much of life is timing, and given that you're into Ryan Holiday and I'm sure the Marcus Aurelius meditations, all that world, when you look back in the 90s and you joined Fox right when they were getting started in the world of sports, how lucky were you in the timing that you got there?
It's honest to God, Merrick, that's one of the best questions I've ever been asked, because I think about it all the time. It's no different than, and Aikman talks about it all the time, how many great quarterbacks have come out of college, just got into a bad system because their number came up in a draft. And all of a sudden, this can't miss guy misses because he's in a bad system with a bad coach and a bad offensive coordinator. It's all luck. And so for me, I came along at the right time in my dad's life because he was an older dad. He was in his mid-40s, and I was born in 1969. And it was right at the time my dad's career took off with the Cardinals. And it was also a time when he wanted one of his kids to be around him. So I had a master's class every night when I was a little boy, watching him do baseball games on the radio. And then you're right. Then I get this, early start in my career. I do the minor leagues when I was 19 and 20. I get hired because of nepotism as much as anything else. And when I'm 21 to do the Cardinals, which is crazy.
Crazy.
Think of being 21 doing big league baseball every day for a franchise like the Cardinals. And now Fox comes out of the sky. I mean, there was no Fox really. But in 1994, Fox buys the rights to cover the NFL, and my broadcast career is just getting started. And I send in a resume tape, and my mom and dad knew Ed Gorin, who ran CBS, and I get an audition, and I get hired to do the NFL on the third or fourth team with the NFL. So the timing there is unbelievable. Nobody was expecting that. And then they get the baseball rights in 96. Well, that's the thing that I'd always done was baseball. And I've already been there for now a couple of years. And they go, well, we want you to do baseball. So you're totally right. Like it not only that, but then even in the sport itself, that's when Derek Jeter was Rookie of the Year. That's when Mariano Rivera was a young pitcher. That's when Posada was blending in with Joe Girardi as the catcher for the Yankees. That's when Paul O'Neill was there. That's when Bernie Williams was just getting started. And it was the rise of the Yankees. It was the beginning of Fox baseball. and it was me in my mid-20s all aligning at the same time. And if any one of those things was out of whack, my career would not have been what it's been to this point. So there is luck of the draw, and it's something that keeps you humble because you just go, man, if it just didn't land right, I don't care who my dad is. If it just didn't land right, I wouldn't be doing all this stuff. So have a little bit of humility and know that it could have gone the other way easily, and you would not be doing what you're doing. So check yourself.
Well, Joe, it's funny you say that too, because 21 you did the Cardinals, 27 was your first World Series. Now when you're watching announcers, like no one's under the age of 30, I feel like. Like
Yeah.
you don't see young guys that get a role doing a World Series at 27 anymore, or even have the opportunity with Fox. Like, why do you think that is? Like it seems like they almost make you do the minor leagues and work your way up before they kind of just give you a big role nowadays.
Yeah, I think one thing Fox did, I think the exception right now is maybe Noah Eagle, who's doing
He's
it
great.
Okay.
Yeah.
and doing it really well, bouncing around. He just did not Amazon, he just did Netflix,
Yep.
and he's really good. But he's
Similar.
Eagle's son. I mean, I
Yeah.
am Jack Buck's son. I think Fox recognized back in '94 that we have the rights, and that yeah, they brought in Madden Summerall, who predate you guys, but they brought in Dick Stockton and Matt Millen. So they had their first two teams taken care of. But then they said, we're going to take a swing and hire a bunch of young guys. And we're going to kind of have an open derby to see who the best young guy is that comes along out of this crop. And for whatever reason, David Hill, my boss, and the people, he and Ed Gorin, that I owe everything to, said, we really like Joe. We want him to do all these big events. But I kept having to prove myself. But I think it gets back to a network being willing to take a chance on a young guy, knowing that, yeah, we can just have everybody who's been doing network sports just change their blazer and the patch on their blazer. And now they were at NBC. Now they're coming to Fox. So what? Or we can try some new young guys. And they did, and it stuck. So I was, again, lucky to be hired not only by the network that I was hired by, but by the people that were making the decisions at that time.
Completely. And Joe, nepotism aside, at what point in your professional career do you feel you became Joe Buck and not Jack Buck's kid?
I'll let you know if that ever happens in my mind. I think that's always kind of the little negative voice in everybody's head. I mean, everybody to some degree, I don't care who you are. Taylor Swift, who are the biggest stars in today's world? There's an insecurity somewhere. I don't care what it is. And so my insecurity is that I am Jack Buck's son, and I will, at least in the city I live in St. Louis, always be regarded as Jack Buck's son. The good thing is, thank God he and I were so close, and there was never any like animosity with me, like, oh, Dad, but we were best friends. So that's fine. That doesn't bother me. And if anything, it kind of keeps me humble and keeps me working hard, I think. I think when you do a handful of World Series, and I ended up doing 24, or you do a Super Bowl on network TV and you're doing it to 110 million people, and you don't throw up all over yourself, and then you do 5 more, at some point in there, and then generations come and go. So there's a whole generation that have no idea who my dad is, except in St. Louis, where part of the highway is named after him. I think, people would go, oh, he had a dad that did this. At some point, all that stuff ages out. And at some point, if my sons do it, nobody will know who the hell I was. So that's just the way life works. But it's a funny question and a real answer that I don't think that'll ever leave my mind, because that's kind of how I started. There's a little bit of guilt involved with that. But it's kept me working hard. So I consider it a positive.
And it's funny because, I'm 24, Evan's 23. Our generation certainly knew you before we ever discovered your father. Just hearing you in Super Bowls, World Series, and now here we are, like 3.5 decades later. So it is ironic.
It is. And it's crazy to me. Here's what you guys will realize as you get older, because you're really young. you're always going to think of yourself at basically this age. Unless I'm a unicorn, I think of myself still as a mid 20s, 30-year-old guy. I just happen to be 55, and you'll see how fast it all goes. And everybody tells you that. And you're like, yeah, yeah, sure, old man. But it goes really stinking fast. And I just remember, as a kid, and no disrespect to you guys, as a young man, as a 24, 25-year-old, doing an NFL game and sitting across from Troy Aikman, who was a
Yeah.
player back then, and him thinking to himself, I'm sure, who the hell is this young guy doing our games? My career's over. Where's Madden and Summerall? But thinking of those guys as always older than me. And now I'm 55, and if I sit with Aaron Rodgers, if I sit with Jared Goff, if I sit with whoever, I think of them as contemporaries, but I don't think of them as 20 years younger than me. But they are. I think of myself as like the young guy still getting started in the business. And then I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like, God, I'm not the young guy anymore. And I look at my hands, I'm like, oh, those are the hands of an old man. It's
That's
just
funny.
funny the way your mind works, and it almost tricks you into thinking that you're still a young guy when you're not. So you guys are always going to think of yourselves as, I don't know, pick an age, 30, 32
Yeah.
years old. You're not going to think of yourself when you're, I don't think, when you're 55 going, yeah, I'm 55. You make the old man jokes, but inside your mind, you're thinking, I'm 32 years old, but you're not. It's kind of weird how that all works.
And I would imagine that 2 6-year-old twins keep you young as well.
One of them is crawling around at my feet right now. So everybody's like, he just banged his head on the underside of my desk.
Love it.
Yeah, people always go, "Oh my God, you got 6.5-year-old twins. They're gonna keep you young." I'm like, it's either that or they're gonna put me down. I don't know, one or the other. I don't know that there's gonna be any middle ground, but it's been awesome. They're fun. It's a lot of work, but I've raised two daughters. I know the work is worth it. As I've got my oldest about to get married. She picked a great
Right.
young man, and I think all that work. Your dad's doing the same with you. When you're an involved parent, I think you're giving your kids a chance. And I was involved with my girls back in the mid '90s and early 2000s, and I'm going to be involved with these boys, and whether they keep me young or put me in a grave.
And speaking of parents, do you think your dad would have ever had a podcast if they were around?
It would have been fun if he could have been
Yeah.
himself. Um, I think even by the title of your podcast, Everything But Politics, it's just everything's become so divided, and everybody's so ready to get mad, and everybody takes the negative or says, "Oh my God, he said that, she said that," and they think the worst, even when it's unintended. So I think of the way my dad lived his broadcast life, and I think, man, if he said some of the stuff he said then now, I don't know that he would have been around for the next day because he was just joking around. But he was the funniest guy. He was the most well-read guy I ever met. I would get a newspaper back when newspapers were a thing, as opposed to your iPad, and I'd go right to the sports page. He'd get a newspaper and he'd blow through the front page section, the living section, and then get to the sports page. And it's what I tell young people who want to get involved in broadcasting. Like, keep reading, keep increasing your vocabulary, keep understanding the world around you, keep understanding politics and what's going on in the world and everything else. You can't just be lazy and go, "Oh, I want to be a football announcer. Therefore, I'll know every stat about Lamar Jackson and what he's done this year, but I have no idea of what's going on in Ukraine or with politics or whatever." You have to be as well-rounded as you possibly can be. But yeah, he would he have had a podcast? Probably not. But I had a podcast for 3 years. I loved it. It's just hard to schedule. It's hard to get guests. It's hard to, everybody's got one. So it's like, hey, you do mine, I'll do yours. And by the time you're done with doing everybody's podcast, you have no time to do anything else.
Yeah. Well, Joe, do you think part of you staying in St. Louis is because of your dad's roots there? Were there ever thoughts to move to maybe a warmer area?
Yeah, I think so. We are building a house in Denver. I think I'll probably end up splitting time between there and here. My wife's from Denver. But yeah, I think my dad had such a presence in this city and did such a great job raising money for countless charities. And I mean, he just worked hard. He wanted to make a difference. And he used what he did with the Cardinals to give himself the platform to be able to raise money for the backstoppers, for the police officers who get killed in the line of duty and their families, for cystic fibrosis, for Matthews Dickey Boys and Girls Club, for, I mean, on and on and on and on. And so that shadow that he cast, I've lived in, and I've tried to continue to do a lot of that stuff. So I've got a children's hospital golf tournament. I've raised money for Parkinson's Foundation. It's a long list, and I'm not saying it yay me. I'm saying it because I want to do what my dad did and make the difference that he made. And I think staying here is a part of that. Also, my mom is here. My daughters are from here. So when they come home for Christmas, like they are right now, they come to St. Louis. My sister's here with her boys. So I think family has kept me here. It's a very small city. It's a very small area of a very small city where we live. That's good and bad. Everybody kind of knows. It's like Mayberry, so everybody knows your business.
Yeah.
And I think expanding beyond that a little bit as I'm in my mid-50s now is probably a good thing. But I will always have roots here in St. Louis, and I'll always have a place here, and I'll always continue to do all these functions I do because it's important.
Yeah,
Awesome.
rightfully so.
St. Louis to Denver ain't that bad. That's what, 2
It's
hours,
not.
if that.
It's
Well-
not. And in today's world with FaceTime, back when I was young, my dad would go on a 2-week trip with the Cardinals and then do NFL and mix that in. I didn't see him for 2 weeks. And now with my boys, with my girls, you just FaceTime. You feel like you're right there. And for this rat behind me right now, see, this is what I didn't do with my dad, because my dad would have been like, hold on a minute, and then he would have kicked me out of the room. I, on the other hand, am putting up with him playing around behind me because I want him near me. But I think with FaceTime and everything else, I think you can get away with kind of living apart and still feeling connected in today's world.
Completely.
Joe, Merrick and I were joking around because you travel so much. Are you ever raw dog in these flights? And if you don't know what that definition is, that is when you just sit on the plane, no phone, no nothing. You just stare at the back of the other chair for the whole flight. And that's like a big social media trend of people just sitting on 15-hour flights and not doing a thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, but I will say after a game here and there, when I fly back, I would say I do more of that than plug in. There is something to be said, especially after I've been talking for 3.5 hours, to feel like I just want my mind to stop. I just need to calm down. And it's hard to go to sleep. It's why when you do baseball for a team and you're doing a game every night, it's hard to go to sleep at night. You get back at 11:30, back to the hotel, and your mind is still going because you've been going so fast with your thoughts, and it's hard to calm down. And I think that's good. I'm surprised that young people are doing that right now. I think it's a good thing.
It's more for like the content on social media. No one's just willingly doing it.
Okay.
They're doing it like I saw a soccer player post with his team and like his buddy recorded him and he just sat there for a 5-hour flight. Not
So
looking
it's
at
like a
just
status thing. It's like, look what I did kind of a thing.
Essentially.
I'm
yeah.
not sure how it became popular, but someone was like, it was like a social media thing, blew up with millions of views. Like, watch me raw dog this flight to Europe. And he just is sitting there and he's got his time lapse of him just sitting there the whole flight.
I
So,
mean, it's interesting to watch the time lapse, but I would never want to
yeah.
do that.
No.
I would lose my mind. And you kind of look like a psycho sitting there, just staring at the chair in front of you for 15 hours. Maybe
Right.
Absolutely.
two, but I've got shows I want to watch. I want to watch The Penguin. I want to
Oh, yeah.
watch. I want to watch Peaky Blinders. I want to watch whatever. I mean, I think that's the one time when we can all kind of concentrate on something. If I'm not reading, like if I'm going to a game, I'm not watching anything. I'm reading. I'm trying to catch up. I'm putting numbers down. I'm putting stuff on my board. It would only be on my flight back, or if I'm going for a vacation, maybe for an hour, but I don't know. I can't sleep on a flight and I need diversions.
Yeah. So Joe, you've been, like I said, you've been doing this for a very long time. It's been around a lot of egos, a lot of big personalities. Outside of the egos, however, people in this industry, TV, media, sports, the ones that are successful, what do they all have in common?
It's corny, but I think putting the work in, I think allows you to be your most confident, allows you to be yourself the most. So doing all the reading, doing the film study, doing the numbers crunching on your boards, whatever it is, or baseball, meeting the people, talking to managers, talking to players, having all that in your storage, and then being able to kind of calmly put that out on TV or radio, whatever it is. I think that's the only way to be good at it. If you're faking it or mailing it in, eventually you're going to be found out. I know that when I sit down and I've got the Elias stats, this is nothing. I mean, I work 2-3 hours a day on a game every day and put the work in. I know Mike Tirico's doing the same thing. I know Jim Nance is doing the same thing. I know Al Michaels is doing the same thing. I know Ian Eagle's doing the same thing, right on down the line. That keeps me working hard, and I think that, and then being a good teammate. I think if you're a jerk and you're out for yourself, I've worked with Troy Aikman for 23 years. I worked with Tim McCarver for 18, because both those guys, John Smoltz for 6, they all knew that I was there to try to make them better, and I felt like they were there to try to make me better. And if they had, something they wanted to bring up, I was all ears and I was willing to engage, and vice versa. So I think you have to be a great partner. It's like being married. You get out of it what you put into it. And I put everything I have into those relationships. And I think the longevity with which I've had those on the air in a high intensity situation is proof that I handle it the right way. I think you have to be a good teammate first and foremost.
And as you mentioned, good teammates and strong partnerships. Did Steve Horn come to ESPN with you?
He did. Yeah, I wouldn't go anywhere without Steve Horn. He's an editorial consultant. What does that mean? Everybody would go, "Oh, your stat guy's here." I'm like, no, he's not a stat guy. Stat guys are numbers. It's talking to scouts. It's where does Jared Goff season or Lamar Jackson season rank in history, and how can you put what Mike Trout is doing up against what Mickey Mantle did in the 60s. I mean, it's history. It's blending storylines and finding the right words to understand why somebody is great at what they're doing on the field. And it's a deeper level than just numbers. It's numbers my 6-year-old can look at and go, well, 21 is more than 20, so this guy, is better than the other. It's why is that important and how is that important? That's what Steve Horn does.
Awesome. Yeah, when we were reading your book, I didn't quite realize the behind the scenes work that goes into, like you said, the articulation, getting the proper numbers, everything, right? Literally everything that goes into what you do.
Yeah, I think people just think we kind of show up, and it can't work that way. I think the viewer, the fan, is more intelligent than he or she has ever been. So if you're going to bring something new, or if you're going to do this job, you better bring something new and have the basics down. So, I mean, I read page after page. I get an email every day that my game this week is the Lions at the 49ers. So I have every article written about the Lions today, and every article written about the 49ers today, and every article written about the entire NFL today. And I can pick and choose what I want to read about that. But everything I have for the Lions and the 49ers, I've already poured through, I've already highlighted. And then I compile these notes every day of the week. And then on Saturday or Sunday, put them on this board that I make that's in front of me. So every game is like an open book test. And I have to know 88 is CeeDee Lamb, and I have to know 87 is Jake Ferguson with the Cowboys. And I have a spotter who's there to help me. But if my mind is going to be on the game and the words are going to come out fast enough, I can't rely on the spotter. I have to know that if 87 is streaking down the field for the Packers, that's Romeo Doubs. If 9, it's Christian Watson. It's, on down the line. 85 is Tucker Kraft. And your mind has to go, okay, I see 85 cutting across the middle. He's wide open. So instead of waiting and going, and that pass is caught by, hold on a second, Tucker Kraft, you have to go, Tucker Kraft is wide open, caught at the 15, down to the 10. That's how you call, in my mind, good play-by-play. So I have to know name, number, and then have all these different storylines, height, weight, college, where they were drafted, how many years in the NFL. All that stuff is right there at my fingertips. So if I want to go there, it's available to me. So, yeah, we don't just show up. There's work that goes in. It's the greatest job, and it's the most fun job, and it's the best way to make a living, and I'm lucky as hell that I get to do it. But there is work that goes into it every day.
It's verbal art.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to see something and then kind of regurgitate it and say it out loud. And that's what there's no book you can read. There's no class you can take. You have to go sit down and go, just watch it and go, what am I seeing? And how would I verbally describe that to somebody?
Yeah.
And you have to get good at it, quick at it. And if you don't, or if you don't work at it, you're never gonna get any better.
Something you said, Joe, reminds me of, I don't know if you're familiar with David Goggins. He's like this, he was a Navy SEAL and big fitness influencer on social media. And he talks about how most people, when they go to the gym, it's like they show up day one, like they're going first day to work, and like they got their clothes picked out, everything's nice and clean. And then come like couple weeks in, your clothes aren't picked out, you're not having your food ready the rest of the day, and you just eventually get sloppier and sloppier. And it seems like you have that work ethic where like you're doing the same thing week in and week out, and it's like the first day of school. Are you ever like not necessarily bored, but are there ever moments where like you don't want to put in the work you have to, but you do it anyways, and then shows exactly how well you perform on air?
Yeah, that's well said. And I do feel like almost after the game ends on Monday night, used to be Sundays, or game one of the World Series ends, it's all about the next one. And getting ready for that next game is like the first day of school. And I do the same routine every week, but it's different. I'm not making widgets. I'm learning about the Lions game last week at Chicago and the 49ers game last week, at Miami. And what went into it? Why did 49ers lose? Why did the Lions win? What were the key points in the game? But all that stuff, if I were to ever get bored with that little insecure man voice inside my head would go, better know that when you're under the gun. Better know that when 20 million people are listening to you. You can't get that wrong. You can't. Everybody in Detroit knows that, that play called the stumble bum got him a touchdown against the Bears. What is that play in golf? It's that fear of failure that I think should get everybody, no matter what they do, if they have pride in what they do. It's the fear of failure that makes them work when nobody's watching. That's kind of how it's just that little voice that goes, I know you want to go upstairs and go to bed, but look that up, put it down. It's going to take you 1 minute. You just thought of, how many games did Aiden Hutchinson play this year? Well, he had 7.5 sacks in 5 games. What week did he get hurt? Week 5 at Dallas. What did he do? Broke his leg. When's he due back? Super Bowl, if they get there. So he's told his teammates, just get me there and I'll be back. Like, that's a good storyline for one of the better players in the league. And I didn't know every detail until I just looked that stuff up yesterday morning. So it's all about fear of failure in my world.
It's really cool hearing you articulate that and explain, how you kind of just briefly gave the storyline, right? How we're looking forward to the Super Bowl. That's the team's motivation. Get me there, and I'm fucking ready.
Yeah,
You know,
that's cool. Like that
Mhm.
that is not numbers. That's not
Yeah.
Aiden Hutchinson had 7.5 sacks in 5 games. Okay, well anybody can look that up. Just go to ESPN.com
Yeah.
and you got that. Well, now fold in another layer. What was the injury? Okay. Fold in another layer. Where did it happen? Fold in another one. When's he due back? And when would that be? That would be Super Bowl weekend. Like that encapsulates what they're thinking about with Aiden Hutchinson. But there, for every Aiden Hutchinson, there's a story about Brandon Ayuk, and there's a story about Brock Purdy buying his offensive lineman Toyotas.
yeah,
Even though he's the
yeah,
lowest paid starting quarterback in the NFL, I don't know how that washes, but he did for Christmas. So it just, you need to know that, and it's got to trigger it. Oh, wait, that reminds me of the story. They just got a sack from Zach Pascal. Well, that reminds me that they don't have Aiden Hutchinson. The Lions don't. Well, where's he? Oh, he's been hurt since week 5. So that's the stuff that you just put in your head, and if you hope you remember it. So you have to get sleep the night before the game and wake up
yeah.
clear headed.
And Joe, before we wrap this up, I got our most iconic memory of you and your call as the Cardinals kid is the Cubs World Series call in 2016. Lifelong Cubs fans, and for all Cubs fans, you're kind of the soundtrack of the most iconic moment in the history of the organization of the Cubs. I mean, I just recall, Bryant, Cubs win the World
Yes,
Series.
sir. Yeah.
I mean, that'll live on
We were running down our street.
forever,
Yeah.
forever and ever. I was 16 at the time. It was just, and I'll never ever forget that moment.
But trust me, neither will I. And everybody goes, "Oh, you're from St. Louis." Well, so what? Everybody's from somewhere. Like if he,
Yeah,
they go, "Oh, even St. Louis fans, like, oh, your dad be rolling over in your grave, in his grave." If he heard you say that doing the Cubs in the World Series, which I've said many times was the highlight of my baseball career, and them winning it, I mean, if I'm like, A, you didn't know my dad, so shut up, and B, if you can't see the magnitude of something happening for the first time, and you can't take this as an insult, for the first time in 108 years,
Yeah.
well, then you can't appreciate anything. And I'm sitting in Wrigley in the broadcast booth, which in 1945 didn't exist. But that's the last time anybody saw a World Series game in Wrigley Field. Think of what was going on in this country in 1945. It was the end of World War II. Think of what was going
yeah,
on in 1908 when they last won it. It was before World War I. Now,
Mhm.
if that isn't beyond mind blowing and cool, then I can't help you. So for me, I'm just like, are you kidding me? And the ratings verified how big it was in this
yeah.
country, and I appreciate those moments. So I love. I'm so honored that I was there, and I can tell you that it was very similar to the Red Sox winning for the first time in 86 years, whatever it was, 86 years, in 2004 when I got to do that one. Because you're talking about generations. You as a 16-year-old, there was also a 96-year-old person who was
Yeah.
Yep.
celebrating the first World Series they saw in their lifetime. And that 96-year-old person was thinking of, uh, I don't know, a
Yeah.
grandma that didn't get to see it. Whatever it is, it's bridging generations. And it was an honor to be there. So, yeah, all that stuff of, oh, you're from St. Louis. And yeah, I am. And I'm proud that I'm from here, and I'm proud that I'm a Cardinal fan. But I'm beyond proud that I got to sit there and call that for a national audience and be the only guy that can say I've called the Cubs winning the World Series on national TV, on TV alone. Period. That's really
Yeah.
cool to me. So it was a series and a moment that I'll never forget.
Likewise.
Yes.
Joe, we want to wrap this up with some rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
Curious to see some of these answers. Travel anywhere in the world.
Paris with my wife.
One album to listen to for the rest of your life.
Um, Vitalogy by Pearl Jam.
Nice.
Nice.
One TV show for the rest of your life.
Mm, I'm trying to give you a real answer, not just go Friends, because that would not be my answer. I would say for all that it brought, I think Ted Lasso, as corny as it could be
It
at
was good.
sometimes, it just made me feel good every time I watched it.
All right. Dream foursome on the golf course.
Me, my dad. I'd have to just see Tiger up close like that,
Yeah.
and John Smoltz because he's really good. And I would put Tiger with my dad, and Smoltz and
Yeah.
I would take them on. I can beat my
Awesome.
dad, and Smoltz with the handicap system could probably hold his own. He's played with Tiger a million times and wouldn't be intimidated, although he's still Tiger.
Yeah. No
Who
doubt.
who would be your last interview ever, dead or alive?
Um, I would like to interview, meaning they could be. It does anybody in
The
history.
person,
Yeah.
the person
Anyone.
yes, anyone ever.
I mean, I would go back to like an old, like Lewis and Clark. It would be
Nice.
me on, trying to figure out what made these two guys brave enough to forge their way west, and when nobody. I mean, it took incredible courage, resilience. Yeah, I would say Lewis and Clark.
Great answer. All right, last one, Joe. Most impactful book you have ever read.
Um, man, I would have to say The Old Man and the Sea.
Hmm.
Never heard that one.
It's a very quick
Check
and
it out.
easy read. Um, that's one that you. There are very few books that I can read more than once. Um, Tuesdays with Maury,
I read that in high school. Yeah.
blending old and young. I think just about life lessons and what it's like because I got to spend a lot of time with my dad in the intensive care unit after he'd been in the hospital for 7.5 months, and being able to talk to somebody whose opinion I appreciated as much as I did my dad's, and have him at the end of his life giving me perspective is kind of what everybody should have. Like, a guy who always worried about money and a guy who was always making fun of me for how I was spending it was telling me all of a sudden, this should teach you that when you get here and you're laying in intensive care and you know you're about to die, when you're here, it's too late. Spend your money, have fun, love your family, be a good guy, enjoy life because this is all you get. And I think we all get so wrapped up in kind of the minute to minute that you don't really appreciate what we have and how we should be living because at some point it's going to be too late to do the stuff you always kind of put off.
Awesome. Well, I think this is an excellent place to end. Joe, thank you for helping us close out our 2024 strong. And here's to an extraordinary 2025 ahead. Thank you so much.
Merrick, thank you. Evan, thank
Thank
you.
you,
And
Joe.
say hi to your pop. He's a special guy.
You got it.
Appreciate
Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right.